It's such a good question. It's such an interesting question to think about joy in architecture, because sometimes with architecture we get really caught up with the sort of technical side of it or the pragmatic side of it, and we talk about programs and we talk about proportions and materials, which are all really important, but we don't talk about joy enough. For me, joy in architecture is to be found in use and activity. I love seeing buildings active and lively and busy, and whether that's a home or a community building, a museum, an art gallery, any kind of building, I just like to see them being used. And you find joy in other things. You find it in texture and light and atmosphere, but really the thing that makes me smile when I'm at a building is seeing buildings being used and sometimes misused, but just activity is where joy is for me. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think about that, isn't it? Because we've had 100 years of architecture being documented by photographers for architects, and that 100, maybe just over 100 years, 120 years is dominated by empty buildings. And I suppose initially that was because the technology wasn't there. We had to use very long exposures to document our cities and our built environment. So it's difficult to have people in. But even since the 50s and 60s, you really had two styles of photographing buildings. You had that kind of style that people like Julius Schulman did a lot, which was you'd have people posed, and you'd have kind of a lifestyle type of shot. A lot of those kind of mid-century houses in America in the 60s were photographed like this. Somebody in a cocktail dress, somebody in a suit, sat looking all smart and very perfect and posed. Or the only alternative was to have the buildings empty and no people. So architecture was a sculptural form. Architecture was edifice, and I think that's dominated the way we read architecture, in magazines and on the web, on the internet for years and years and years. And I think it's a shame. I don't know why. I think sometimes I think for a long time it was a style, and people wanted to stick to it. I think some architects prefer not to have people in because they think they have more control over the image that way. Sometimes architects say to me, can you go and photograph it before the people come in and mess it up? And I think that's such a shame, because I think good architecture actually responds well to inhabitation and use and mess. So I think partly it was down to control for a long time, but I think we're moving away from that, or we're seeing more commonly now. We're seeing images and films where you see mess and you see a bit of life and a bit of joy. I don't know. I mean, I suppose when you're designing, because I used to work in architecture practices, I used to work on the design of buildings as well. So I know what it's like when you're designing a building and you spend so much time poring over these drawings and all of these plans and elevations that you're working on, and everything's very precise. You're working with a scale rule or a CAD package. You're drawing things, very precisely. So architecture lends itself to precision a lot of the time, I think. And then in construction, you hope that the builders and the contractors are precise in their work as well. So I think architecture does lean towards precision a lot of the time. And then I suppose maybe that spills over into the photography and the documentation of architecture as well. Architects want things to be precise and controlled. But I also think maybe it's not fear. Maybe a lot of the time it's just a style that's been so prevailing for so long. So maybe it's just maybe we could just welcome a new style in, and we could do both. The architect has left the building as a video installation. It's 2 big video screens with surround sound, 7-speaker surround sound. And the whole idea is it's an exercise in people watching. So you're supposed to sit down, watch it, and completely immerse yourself in it with the visuals and the sound. The idea came from a video shoot that I did last year in Hackney in East London of a building by Henley Hale Brown architects, and they'd done a school, and outside the school there was a long bench along the street, and it was fascinating just watching people come and go and sit on the bench while they were waiting for their children to finish school. And I tweeted a picture of this bench and just said we could have made the whole film just one shot of this bench for 5 minutes, just watching people come and go. And months after that, 4 or 5 months after that, Pete Collard from the RIBA got in touch with me and sent me a screenshot of my own tweet and said, why don't we do this? Let's do this. So he kind of was the instigator for all of this. And then we went in this process of going back through my archive, my video archive, which is 10 years of filmmaking, focused on architecture. And I worked with the photographic artist Sophia Catherine Smith in arranging the footage and deciding what we used and what we didn't use and what order everything came in. And then I worked with the sound artist Simon James to create this sound piece that surrounds you while you're watching it. So it all started with a tweet, I suppose, and then it grew from there. And then the name of the thing is called The Architect Has Left the Building. The whole idea is what happens to buildings when the architecture's finished, when the architect has gone and left. What happens then? Because we believe that, we believe in our studio that the life of a building starts when the architect leaves and the people come in. The projects that we feature, there's 15 projects in the film, in the installation. There's 15 different works of architecture by different architects, and they're all in the UK. And all of the footage was originally commissioned by a magazine or by the architects. But in a sense, we're kind of discovering these buildings. We think of a lot of our work is about discovery. We get sent there by an architect or a magazine, but once we arrive, we're just spending all our time finding these little moments and the little corners of the building where these beautiful interactions between people and architecture happen. In a lot of ways, our work is about finding and discovering rather than just documenting. I mean, the idea, like I said earlier, the idea of this bench at the school in Hackney was the kind of genesis for the whole project. But it was interesting when we started to go through all of the other projects and decide what we wanted to include. We realized that every building has an equivalent moment. And a lot of the times it was a bench, but sometimes it wasn't a bench. We almost called the exhibition Bench because of this, because that was going to be the name of the exhibition. You're the first person that I told that. That's an exclusive. We nearly called the exhibition Bench, but it didn't make a lot of sense, so we changed it. But every building had that moment. So sometimes, in the swimming pool, some of the footage is really active. People are being very active. So in the swimming pool, they're swimming around or they're playing with their children in the pool. But some of the buildings are very calm and quiet. So in the mosque, for instance, that's moments of peace. It's people sitting down and praying, arriving for the call to prayer and praying. In the train station, people are moving. But even in the train station, in a very busy London Bridge train station, one of the busiest train stations in the country, people are moving around loads, but still there's a bench in the middle of the shot where people just sit and stay still and aren't moving. So bench became a kind of word to describe these moments of peace where that activity is distilled in. I think we're quite lucky with our studio that because we've been around for a little while now and we have a bit of a reputation. I hope we do. I hope we have a good reputation. It means that when architects come to us, it's usually because they want the style in which we work in. So they want our vision of their building, which is great. I mean, they also give us a brief and they also say, we want, this is really important that you do this part of the building or this material or this way the building flows and the how you move through the space. But most of the time they commission us because really they just want to see what we think of it and how we document it. So it's in that sense, it's always a collaboration between us and the architects. You know, they come with their ideas and we come with ours, and hopefully we meet somewhere and we can give them something that surprises them, but they can guide us a little bit as well. With the technical aspect, sometimes we get given, the trickiest thing is we get given CGIs that architects have done, and they say, and these were done before the project began, before the building began, and they say, can you please replicate this CGI? And it's an impossible angle and it doesn't exist. And that's really difficult because, you know, CGIs are getting so much better and better, but still, you know, they don't have the constraints of being there in person. So that makes it tricky. So technology has had quite an effect on what we do. Also, you know, the difference between a photograph that works well across 2 pages of a magazine printed large is quite different to a photograph that does well on a tiny screen for Instagram. So that's another technological constraint, is deciding where your images are going to end up as well. So we work quite a lot with the architects discussing that, and ultimately it has to be a collaboration. We have to work with them and they have to work with us. So we try to we try to make sure everyone's happy. Basically, we're happy, we get our creative freedom, they get the images that they wanted, plus hopefully we can surprise them with some things as well. I mean, we could go into a lot of film theory here, but the sequencing in film is absolutely crucial in all films. You know, so to take cinema as an example, in the 1920s, the Soviet filmmaker Kuleshov did an experiment where he did a still film, you know, 40 seconds of a man's face, of this actor just looking straight at the camera without moving for 40 seconds. And then he cut it in half and made 3 new versions of it. So in one of them, you see the man staring at the camera, then you see a bowl of soup, and then you see him staring at the camera again. And in another one, you see a man, he stares at the camera, and then you see a coffin in the middle, and then you see him staring at the camera. And the audience that he showed these 2 clips to said, well, this is incredible. This is, how can this actor with such small movements in his eyes tell us that he's hungry? And how can he tell us that he's mourning? And of course, the clips are the same, but because you inserted a bowl of soup or a coffin in the middle, the audience connects the dots and makes their own story. So obviously that's an extreme case, and we're not doing that with our films, but the sequencing of footage is absolutely fundamental to cinema, and it's what makes a film rather than a flipbook of photographs. So in The Architect Has Left the Building, it was crucial that we got that right, and because the way that you read one clip is completely reliant on the clips either side of it. So to work with Sophia, she works a lot with found photographs and found footage, was really interesting to see how she understood that and how the sequencing came to life with her work. We worked together on all of that. So yeah, sequencing is in all films, documentaries, short films, 30-second TikTok videos, or 3-hour feature films that win Oscars. Their sequencing is absolutely vital. Hopefully more joy, right? I want to see more joy. I want to see more use, more enjoyment. This weekend we were in Berlin just for a holiday, and we went to the new National Gallery by Mies van der Rohe, so really famous modernism, and it's got this amazing huge plaza around it, and I really enjoyed watching people use that plaza. And there were some kids on bikes practicing BMX bikes, there were some skateboarders, there were couples having picnics, and it struck me that I've never seen that in photographs of that building. I've only ever seen it empty, and it was beautiful to see this very austere modernist building, but actually have people having fun in it and playing in it. So let's just have more joy in architectural photography. Let's have more fun with it, and let's not have it all be too serious. More joy, I hope. More joy, more smiles. We want to keep making films, and we want to explore cinema and how that works with architecture. And we would love to do. The moment the architect has left the building is touring the UK, we're taking it to different venues. We'd love to take it around the world, and we'd love to make different versions of it in different countries, because it would be fascinating to see how the UK version was different to the India version, was different to 100 different countries all over the world. That'd be fascinating to do that.